Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Stina Duva, President and CEO of the West Orange Chamber. Thank you for joining me this morning at our Spotlight Speaker event with a company that I've had the pleasure of knowing one of our speakers today for at least 3 or so years, maybe longer, because time is flying. So this year, got to add that one on. But we've determined the events of our Spotlight Speaker as well as some of our other virtual events through surveys that we've asked our members to fill out for us. And one of the things that really bubbled up to the top during the most recent survey was about team building. And that's exactly what this is about today. And at a time when everyone is stressed and there's little certainty in even the next day, sometimes nerves can get a little bit frazzled in an office environment because workloads are perhaps greater than they have been before. Staffs have been limited. You're not always in the office together. So there's just a lot of stressors that are on there. And we thought this was a perfect event to give you today to learn how to work well with your team, learn the personalities and how they can mesh. And I think this is going to be a great program. So I thank you for answering the surveys that helped us to develop this event for today. It is all about communication, and until you know who you're working with, it's difficult to communicate. So thank you today for being here. I also want to make sure that you know we are being recorded, that if you have, we want you to put your name, your business, and your email address in the chat box. That way you can create relationships with people even through virtual events. If you have questions, I think we'll be putting them in the chat box as well and addressing them, I think, at the end. I know that we need to be done at 12:30 today because our speakers have another event that they have to get to. So we're going to be respectful of the time limit today. And if we don't get to all the questions, we can certainly get those over to Dan and Susan after the fact and answer them individually if we need to. So I want to thank the board members that I know are on the call today event. We have Joe Barsh with State Farm Insurance, and we have Dr. Kimberly Hardy with UCF is here as well. The trustees that I know are with us are Observer Media Group, Orlando Health, and Computer Business Consultants. So thank you to our trustees for being here, our board members for being here. And now I want to just tell you a little bit about our guest speakers today. So they're with Curium, and Curium is a company, like I said, I met several years back, Curium Solutions, Dan Entwistle. Dan brings a wealth of experience in change management, leadership development, and performance improvement, having worked with some of the biggest brands across the US and Europe. Not so much Europe right now, but he's going back. His experience spans multiple industries, and he has supported several leading organizations such as AstraZeneca, and I know we've all heard of that company, CLS Bank, Barclays, FIS, NASA, CIA, FBI, all initials we know, Robinhood, PepsiCo, L'Oreal, and National Customer Services. And I know you've done work with Orange County Public Schools Foundation as well. And Susan Hostetler is also a consultant with Curium. I want to make sure I get the names correct. 25 plus years experience developing training, service, and leadership programs for iconic global brands. Hard Rock Cafe, they used to have their headquarters here in Metro West. Tupperware Brands, Toys R Us, and Walt Disney Company. Susan ensures her strategies and solutions are based on real world learnings, practical application, and she incorporates innovation in different perspectives. So let me now turn this over to Daniel and Susan. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that awesome introduction. As Tina said, I'm Susan. Dan is a couple of boxes over, probably somewhere, and we're really excited to share TetraMap with you today and provide you with some thoughts on how you can increase communication and build better teams through communication and TetraMap. So, if you haven't already, there's a link in the chat box that is a bit.ly that will take you to a 30-second instrument. It's a little mini version of the TetraMap instrument. And if you go ahead and take a minute and take that, and then once you've finished with that, if you could add your results into your name as Dan and myself and Joe has, that would be great. That way we can kind of identify where everybody is lying with TetraMap, and we will get started with our content. So just take 30 seconds and do that. And we're going to actually keep talking and start going through the content as you're doing that. So we won't go through anything that you probably don't already know and haven't already heard. So our goal for today is really to, provide you with some insight into what drives your own behavior and how this can affect the relationships you have with your team as well as with other people. And we really want you to walk away with a sense of awareness on how diversity impacts your team and how you can create stronger teams through highlighting that diversity aspect. And we're also going to share how Tetramap can create a common language that you can speak so that you can use that to accelerate reaching your goals. So it'll kind of speed your results. And we're going to do that in a way that's memorable. We're going to share a framework with you, a way that you can look at problem solving and communicating more effectively through 4 different lenses. And it's very simple to remember. And we want you to really walk away with ways that you can use the core concepts to influence others and build better teams and reduce conflict within those teams. So that's kind of our highlights for today. So what is Tetramap? That is the question. So Tetramap was created 20 years ago. They're having a birthday this month. So we're really excited that Tetramap has been around for 20 years and it has a ton of different applications and uses. But the greatest benefit is that it really helps people to understand who they are from a behavioral standpoint and identify behaviors in other people in a way that is, as I said, memorable and immediately applicable. So by the time we end today, you'll have a good sense of how to apply the information. And, when I think about Tetramap, I think about, when you get in your car to go on a trip somewhere. And these days, one of the first things that you do is you turn on your GPS to get a map to help you figure out how to get from point A to point B. But, nobody's given us a map of one of the most complex challenges, which is communication. So Tetramap helps us by providing this roadmap, essentially for communications to help you get where you want to go in a faster, more effective way. And then we hope that it's entertaining and memorable as well. So that's one of the reasons why we're sharing it today with you. And it's going to be a whirlwind training session. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he's going to start with some trust.
Yep, brilliant. Thanks for that, Susan. So good morning, almost good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. I'm just going to sort of discuss the elephant in the room, first of all, with the accent, because otherwise what sometimes happens is people start saying in the chat box, where's the accent from? Australia, New Zealand, Texas? In fact, no, nobody ever says Texas, but it is from the UK, but I've been in the US for almost 5 years now. And I'm actually right here in our sort of locality, our neighborhood here in Horizon West. But I also say, don't be fooled by the accent. I am 100% Floridian now. I was actually in my office yesterday and it was freezing. We had it at like 68 degrees. And I was like, anything less than about 76 nowadays is just too cold. But I think, as Susan's already touched on today, Tetramap's a great tool and it's just really simple and it helps us to build relationships and communicate more effectively. And I think one of the key sort of bedrocks or cornerstones of successful relationships, whether that's in the community or in the workplace or at home, is the ability to build trust. So I've just got a little exercise I want to kick us off with. And if you don't mind, it would be great if you could just turn on your cameras a moment, those who feel comfortable doing so, just so I can see a few more people as well. So if you could just turn on your cameras for us, that'd be great. Thanks for that, Esme. A few more cameras are turning on. Just give you a moment to find where do I turn the camera on. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Stina. So I've just got a question for you. I'd just like, by a show of hands being raised, if you trust yourself, raise your hand. So it's not a trick question. If you trust yourself, just by a show of hands, just raise your hand for me, please. Okay. Most people putting their hands up there. Yeah, a few are like, I don't know, it depends what day of the week you're asking me on, maybe. If it's a Monday versus a Friday night, do I trust myself? All right, interesting. But the majority of people seem to sort of raise their hands, maybe a bit of social conformity there, or follow the group as most other people were doing it towards the end. This time, I'm going to ask you to do it again. But before I ask you to do it, just let me define trust. If I define trust as this, so every time you make a commitment to yourself, you stick to it 100% of the time. So every time you say, I'm going to go to the gym or go for a run this evening, I'm not going to drink wine on a Monday night anymore, I'm definitely going to clean the yard out this weekend, I'm going to get that email responded to or that phone call back to a friend done today. If you stick to your commitments 100% of the time, put your hand up and you trust yourself, put your hand up again. If you can say you do it all the time. Okay, so from what I can see on my screen here, it's we're pretty much a bunch of untrustworthy people then. I'm just kidding, but a bit of difference there, because some of us did put our hands up the first time around, and then the second time, now you've defined it, maybe I'm not so sure. So I'd just like to open it up. Maybe Jeff, you can start us off, because I can see you there, Jeff. What changed for you? Because the first time you put your hand up, the second time you didn't.
I'm just not 100% in all my commitments. I try to do the best I can, but things come up.
Yep, try to do the best I can, right? But sometimes things come up. So thanks for that, Jeff. And maybe one other person can share. Maybe Carolyn. But you're just on mute there. Carolyn, we can't hear you. There we go.
Pretty much the same as the previous speaker. I try to meet my commitments, and sometimes I have to change. I fail, and then I decide I should take a different path. Other times I say try again. So it's a learning experience.
Absolutely right, absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting when we talk about trust. And as we click onto the next slide here, I was very fortunate to meet somebody a number of years ago, Stephen Covey Jr. His dad's called Stephen Covey as well, just to confuse matters. But for those of you who aren't aware who Stephen Covey is, he's a real thought leader, in fact, a global authority when it comes to things around building trust, helping teams perform better, and thinking about leadership and how we all show up. And I was very fortunate to meet him at a seminar. I'd love to say I was, keynoting with him, but that wasn't the case. I just bumped into him at the bar afterwards. And I said, this is one of the biggest things I've taken from your work, Stephen. And it's this, that we judge ourselves by our intent, but others by their behavior. We judge ourselves by our intent and others by their behavior. So it's not that, Jeff didn't intend to get that planning on time to us today, but something maybe happened. Jeff maybe had to go and pick his kids up from school because one of them was taken ill. But I don't see that if I'm somewhere else in the office. I just see that Jeff made a commitment. He said he'd have the planning. He didn't deliver it. And now I don't know if I can trust Jeff. And what tends to find, and Jeff, I do trust you, just to clarify there, sorry. But what tends to happen is we apply these filters and we apply these lenses where we kind of let ourselves off. I intended to go to the gym, but I got stuck in traffic, so I'll just go tomorrow. But if somebody else lets us down or doesn't follow through on something, it can cause us conflict and causes a lack of trust with that person. I think one of the best examples I often use, and it took me a while to get used to the I-4, and thankfully I use the 429 quite a bit now, is when I'm driving down the I-4 and all of a sudden that junction appears and I dart across at 70 miles an hour and I'm like, phew, I made it, I nearly missed my turn off. The next day I'm going down that motorway or that highway and somebody else darts across me at 70 miles an hour. I've got a few choice words for them, and it might even include a little honk of the horn, and that was very silly, right? And this is what we mean, right? I didn't intend to cut somebody up, but if they cut me up, I'll sometimes take offense to it. So trust is a really important factor, and it starts with ourselves and the self-trust and how we hold ourselves accountable so that we can build trust with others. And we use Tetramap to help us think about how we can build trust with people who are maybe like us, but also people who are different to us as well. And you'll get a glimpse of that as we go through today about understanding some of those differences. and why they are valuable. So if you could move us on again, Susan. So hopefully that makes sense so far. So within Tetramap, and when we think about Tetramap and communication, Tetramap uses two metaphors. So the first metaphor it uses is the metaphor of nature. So, you know, to keep us on track with time today, what we can see here is pretty much the world's largest acorn or the world's smallest oak tree, okay, at first glance. But this tiny little nut contains everything it needs over time to grow into this magnificent oak tree. But it needs a bit of help along the way. Yeah. So what does it take? You know, feel free to take yourselves off mute or use the chat box. What does it take over time to transform from this tiny nut? What does it need to grow into this magnificent tree?
Nurturing.
Water,
Nurturing, water,
sunlight.
sunlight. All right, we've got a sharp audience. You can see the direction of travel, right? So it needs the earth, the air, the water, and the fire. It needs the elements of nature. And sometimes we find in organizations we work with, and we're very fortunate, I think Stina mentioned it, you know, locally we work with Orange County Public Schools, UCF, Rollins, the City of Orlando, all the way through to companies like NASA and the CIA. And what we say is quite often in organizations, we'll have people and you can't really see the full potential unless we know how to nurture it and unless we know how to bring it out of them. So nature works perfectly when it's brilliantly balanced. So when those four elements are in play, nature's normally pretty content and things are good. But if one of them's overplayed, so a bit like, you know, late last night and into this morning, if there's too much air in nature, we have a hurricane and it can be destructive. And the same can be said of us as individuals, and the same can be said of the teams we work in, if we use it as a metaphor. If you overplay or underplay one of these elements, it may be destructive. So we're going to talk a bit more about what are these elements and how do they relate to the workplace in a moment. But the key message here is using Tetramap, we see ourselves through these four elements or preferences. And what we need to understand is that we need all four of them to be as effective as we can in the roles that we play in the community and at work. Because if we overplay or underplay them, they can be destructive. I'm sure we've all been a part of a team where we've sometimes heard somebody say, well, they're really good at getting stuff done, but they create a car crash everywhere they go and upset people. Yeah, or they talk a good game, but they never really see anything through. And this is where the underplaying and overplaying of these elements can sometimes appear. So the first metaphor is nature, to help us think about the nature of our behavior and the nature of us as leaders. And we're going to talk to you very soon. I'll hand over to Susan about, well, what are those elements? How do they show up in us so that you can actually relate to it? So the second metaphor that Tetramap uses is the tetrahedron. So if we skip through this one onto the tetrahedron, Susan, that'd be great. We've just got a little video to play now. This is a bit where I could start humming some sort of theme music because we have had an audio challenge there. There is a bit of background music to it normally, but I'll just let it play through for now. Okay, so the second metaphor that Tetramap uses is the tetrahedron. So the first one is nature, and you're going to learn more about your elemental style and preferences in a moment. And the second one is the tetrahedron. Now, at this point, quite often people will go, tetra what? And what does this have to do with the workplace? What does this mean? Now, the tetrahedron is actually nature's building block. So this is a tetrahedron shape, one I prepared earlier. When we run this as a training course, we have people build these from scratch, which is quite interesting to see them struggle with the concept of it. But basically, we use it again as a metaphor because it is one of the strongest shapes known on the planet. So Buckminster Fuller, who was a scientist, a genius, and an architect, spent many years studying nature. And what he actually found was when you boil everything down to its simplest, purest form, nature uses this tiny little shape, tetrahedrons, to build everything. So we use this second metaphor to think about if this is a strong structural shape, then how can we think about that as our operating system? How are we showing up in the workplace? So let me give you a bit more context around what I actually mean by this. And if you can click on again for us, Susan, please. System's catching up. So a couple of key points to pull across from the tetrahedron shape. First of all, it's very structurally sound. And that's the type of operating system that we want in the organizations we work in. If we take one of these sides away, the system falls apart. It's not as structurally as strong. So that's why we say you need to show up in all four elements when we think about Tetramap and when we think about this model. So when you actually complete the Tetramap assessment, if you do a full one, you would find you get a score in every single one of these elements. Because what we're reinforcing with Tetramap is we're unboxing people. You are all of these and not just one, and not to box people in. So predominantly you might find you've got a top two. So you can see Jo, if you can see Jo, she's got an F and an A, which is a fire and air element. Jeff's got an earth and fire. You can see under mine, I've got an earth and fire there as well. So you'll tend to have two of the elements, which are your top two, but it doesn't mean that the others aren't there. So what we'll say is we say, think of this tetrahedron shape. If these are the two lenses you're currently viewing the world through, so if mine are earth and fire, how is that currently serving you? And what impact is that having on your performance? And would it serve you to go somewhere else on this map or on this shape to show up in a different element to build relationships or have better communication? So that's just a very quick insight at the moment into this. But to recap, it's a very strong shape. If we have all four elements there, it works very effectively. It creates a strong operating system as a reflection of your operating system. There is no opposites in Tetramap. Everything is equal. So for those of you who are maybe familiar with doing personality style assessments, quite often you'll be told, oh, you want to be in this sort of box or that sort of box. With Tetramap, as I've said, we're unboxing people. It's interdependent. Everything is connected. And therefore, because it's connected, it creates this synergy. Okay? So when we talk about the tetrahedron, all we're saying is this is you. This is the way you're viewing the world. If your top two are earth and fire or air and water or whatever they are, how is that impacting the people around you? And when would it serve you to go into a different element to improve your performance? So I'm just going to pause for a moment because we do have to go at pace in these sort of quick seminar sessions. But to recap, we've got the nature metaphor, four elements that you're made up of, and we've got the tetrahedron, which is really just your operating system, the way you're currently using those elements to interact with others. I just wonder if there's any questions or anything you want me to clarify before we continue to move forward. I'm not seeing anything come through just yet. Okay, so with that in mind then, very quick overview of the two metaphors. I'm going to hand over to Susan now to talk about, well, where are people on the map? And tell me a bit more about these elements then. Help me make sense of it all. Susan.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. So if you haven't had a chance to take the instrument, the mini version that we've provided, go ahead and while we're going through the elements, go ahead and take that. The bit.ly is in the chat box. So there's just a quick, short 30-second mini version of the instrument that you can take that will help you to identify your top preferences. So where are you on the map, and what do the different elements mean? So if you take a look at Earth, we say Earth like a mountain is firm. And we actually do some neuro-linguistic programming in our sessions where we use video, we use audio, we use visual aspects, and we use motion to help embed the learning. So we say Earth like a mountain is firm. So everybody do this, Earth like a mountain is firm, because this is going to help you remember the elements. So Earth means that it is all about the facts. And things like being decisive and being bold in your decisions. So these are the people that you're going to probably go in their office on a Monday morning, and they're gonna be like, yes, do you have an appointment? What do you need? We need to walk and talk because I got to go somewhere. So they're the ones who are driving decisions and are continually wanting to have those decisions made. However, if Dan talked about the overuse of one of the elements, and if Earth is overused, it could potentially come across as being blunt, which is, again, not their intention, but that's the way that it's coming across overall.
Yeah, so it's a really good link back to where we started with trust, right, around intent versus behavior. 9 times out of 10, I'm quite high earth. I don't wake up in the morning and think, who can I go and be rude to today? Who can I go and come across as blunt towards? But sometimes it's just in my nature, because it's just natural to me, especially if I'm under pressure onto a tight deadline, to just be a bit shorter, just be a bit snappier. High earth is often, as Susan said as well, quite competitive in nature. And again, I got on an aeroplane. In fact, I got on one 2 weeks ago, but going back to the start of the year, I got on one. And the air hostess said to me, what would you like to drink, Mr. Entwistle? And I said, a bourbon on the rocks. And the guy next to me said, I'll have the same, but make it a double. And I was like, all right, I'll have a triple. And she kind of looked at me as like, is he for real? Is he kidding? And like, I don't even know what I'm competing for. But it was like, it's not the same if it's a double, right? So it's almost like high earth always has to win, always driving for those results.
Yep. Thanks for that, Dan. So if we move on to air, we say air like the wind is clear. And the motion we do for air is this. So air like the wind is clear. And air is based on logic. So these are people who have a high air preference. They love to live in a spreadsheet. The spreadsheets are their friends. They love a good Excel spreadsheet. And they are about the orderly aspect. They love accuracy. They love the detail of things. However, if air is overused, it can potentially come across as being critical because they're very focused on the detail. And if they're not getting all that detail, they may sometimes come across as judging other people and being a little bit critical from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'd just like to build on what Susan said there, taking us back to earth first of all, to give you an example. In a workshop, we'll often break people out, and Susan's going to touch on this in a moment anyway, and we'll get them to go away and think of some questions and present back. So in one of our recent workshops, a high earth group presented back a skit. So they had they had 6 chairs it was, and they were pretending that they were driving somewhere, and they were basically saying, let's just go, let's get there. And I said, can I just stop and ask you? Can I just say, what type of vehicle are you in? And they're like, why? I said, because all 6 of you are sat there driving it, right? So high earth wants that control and wants to be in control and driving towards stuff. High air wants to make sure that we're going to the right place, and that it connects to the bigger picture, and that we're very clear on the steps as to how we're going to get there. So very logical, very orderly. So we had a group who did a presentation who were high air, and normally you'll have a flip chart and they'll present it. And somebody just stood there and just said, if everybody can get the cell phones out, we've emailed you our presentation, we'll give you 5 minutes to reflect on it and digest it, and then we'll take questions. But we wanted to ensure you have it to take away from today. So that sort of detail, very detail orientated, very much into the planning side of things. So if high earth is, let's get it done, high air is, let's make sure we get the right stuff done and get it right first time. Very much about quality. That's the real driver here, is to get it right first time. I'll give you a final example on that one. I'll hand it back to Susan. When I had the mother-in-law recently stay with us for Christmas time it was, she was uploading the dishwasher one evening and the wife went, whoa, stop. And the mother-in-law was like, what? And she's like, you're doing it all wrong. You put the knives in and then you put the forks in and then you put the spoons in because it's easier to put it away when it's all been cleaned. So it's just these little differences where there's no right or wrong. It's just preference. So the mother-in-law was like, okay, I'm just out of here. You do it. But you can see where people can have that conflict because it's just different. Whereas for me, it's high earth, just throw it in, throw it back out. Thanks, Susan.
So our next element is water, and we say water like a lake is calm. So everybody do water like a lake is calm. If I don't see anybody doing it, come on, join me.
So just to be clear, I don't want anybody going off here saying we went on this really strange call today and they made us do some hand gestures and they were filming it and I don't know where it's going to appear. Just to be clear, it really does help the learning stick. Just one story. I was very fortunate to be at the Pentagon doing a session, and we were told there's a load of Secret Service people in here and intelligence community people, and that you can't ask them the second names, you can't ask them the rank or which agency they're attached to. But we're really looking forward to building trust and breaking down some barriers today. And I'm like, yeah, great, how are we going to do that then? But there was one guy, and it was very clear he was one of the generals. Because when I'm saying, come on, we're all going to do this, Earth like a mountain is firm, I could see like the whites of his knuckles. But he came up to me at the first break without even realizing what he was doing and said, Dan, you know, you're talking about Earth then. It just makes it stick. So it's a bit of fun. It's a bit different. It makes it more engaging, but it genuinely makes that learning stick. Sorry, Susan.
No problem. So water, we say water like the lake is calm, and that is based on feelings. And things like being considerate and thinking of others, being patient. So you may associate water with, you know, being very warm and calming, have a calming effect. A lot of people, when they talk about, I need to go to my safe space or a place where I feel calm, it's either like the beach or a bathtub or, you know, something that involves water, because it does have a calming effect on people. But if it's overused, you can come across as being hesitant and not able to make decisions, which again, is, as Dan talked about before, it's not the intent, but it is the way the behavior comes across overall. So our last element is fire, and we say fire like the sun is bright, and we say fire. So fire, this is fire. Here, and fire is based on things like the possibilities and what is next, what is coming, you know, what is coming in the future, what is the possible, and things about like spontaneous and being enthusiastic. And I have a high fire, that's my highest preference. So I try to be as enthusiastic as possible. And you can notice that I talk with my hands a lot. Because that's just the way that I communicate. But if I overplay my fire, then I can actually get really easily distracted and squirrel out. So if you're familiar with the squirrel factor, where you're talking to somebody, yes, Joe is like, yep, I know what that is. Where, you know, you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden you're like, hey, what's going on over there? You just totally zone out and go somewhere else. And it's not that you don't care about the person that you're talking to, but it's just, you just have so many things going on in your head. It's like that little hamster wheel in your head, just going around and around and around and around, that you just get distracted very easily. And it takes us a little bit more to focus and to provide that intensity and participation.
Yeah,
we do get distracted.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And I'd like to recap those elements before we move on, but I just saw a question pop up from Chris, which was a great question. Some of you may be familiar with a tool called DISC. So it has a lot of similarities to DISC. And what you've got to remember today is this is a 45-minute introduction. We tend to do these workshops anywhere from 2.5 to about 6-7 hour full day sessions. So it has got some similarities to DISC for those who are familiar with DISC. But a couple of the key differences would be, first of all, is the simplicity around it. So when we've done the work at NASA, for example, we've been able to use TetraMap and take people through an experience at the C-suite level. So I've worked with Andrew, the CFO there, all the way through to the junior interns who start at NASA. And quite often, a lot of the other tools are very much, well, we're only going to do this with a particular group of leaders. You can do this with anybody. We've done it with students. We've done it with teens. It's just very flexible. I think the other thing with Tetramap is, as you're hopefully starting to see on this very quick overview today, is the language is very neutral. So in the DISC model, they talk about D being dominant, which can sometimes have a certain connotation sort of associated with it. With Tetramap, the language is neutral. We just talk about that's high earth, or that's high air, or high water, or high fire. So without getting too theoretical, it's based in Jung's theories, which haven't changed for about 100 years now, even though sort of neuroscience and the way our brains operate, we've learned a lot more about those. But it has got similarities to DISC. It's just simpler, easier to grasp, and therefore people are more likely to do something with it. So I think just as a quick recap, and Susan, I don't know if we've got time then to take a couple of quick questions, if there is any, before we move on to the next part. We've got 4 elements. When you do the instrument, you'll get a score in all 4. You'll have 2 that come out stronger, but it doesn't mean you can't go there with the other 2. And just as that recap, Earth is very much based in results, very driven, very much about getting the goals done, getting things over the line. You might see me sometimes in the office on a Monday morning and it's, can we walk and talk? I've got somewhere to be. I'm glad you had a nice weekend and went to somebody's wedding, but I ain't really got time. I don't really care. I just want to get on with the work today. High air, much more formal, much more methodical, maybe a little bit slower like I've done in my tone and in their pace. And then high water is just more calming, more about connecting, engaging and bringing people together, quite good at bringing teams together and sort of removing conflict out of situations. And then high fire just brings that energy, brings that fun, brings the ideas. We'll sometimes say in an office space, you might hear fire before you see them, because you'll hear them coming through the corridor because of the life and soul of the office. They bring that fun. Any questions? Take the silence and the no chatters. Good to go.
All right. So what are the deeper details of each one of the elements? So if you think about how you communicate with others, how you want other people to approach you, how you like to be approached, how don't you like to be approached? Dan and I gave some insight into that previously, but if you think about from an Earth perspective, how do you like people to approach you? Jeff, I know that you have high Earth preference that came out in your mini instrument. So how do you like people to approach you?
Just straightforward. I'll just take it as it is.
Yeah.
And even in the answer, right? Be brief, be bright, be gone.
Yep. Be right, be gone. Yeah. And from an air perspective, let's see. Did anyone have a high air preference? Kimberly, you had a high air preference. How do you not like to be approached?
How do I not like to be approached?
Yeah.
I don't like to be attacked with all this coming at me. I like a very calm, very logical approach.
Yeah, just give me a bit of space, right?
Right,
You quite often see in an organization, I use this as an example sometimes. You've got somebody who's quite high air, you'll go over to the desk, like Kimberly's desk, Kimberly, how's it going? And putting my arm around you, and you might just get somebody turn around and just go, what are you doing in my space? Did we have a meeting scheduled? My 15-minute warning reminders not gone off. What are you doing? Get out of here. Yeah, and
Perfect description.
This is the simplicity I'm talking about. So it gives us these clues, cues, and triggers. And now I know Kimberly's like that. Next time I'll probably slow down. I might just knock on her door and not barge into her office. I might just give her a bit of space and say, would you mind if I schedule some time? There's something I'd like to talk to you about that's important related to the work we're doing together. Sure, here's when I'm available.
Why are you hugging me?
Exactly.
That's me.
But there's no right or wrong.
Yeah, and if you think about from a water perspective, what does the water element bring to the team? So, who has a high water element? Does anyone have a high water element? I do. So what I think I bring to the team, so water is actually my second highest element. And I think sometimes I bring that that human element, that people element. I'm always thinking about people's perception and how others are feeling. So I'm always trying to kind of run everything that I think about, what I work on, through that human element overall. And then from a what motivates you in your highest element perspective, if you look at that from a fire perspective, Joe, what motivates you in fire?
Business-wise?
Business, personal, whatever. What motivates you?
What usually motivates me is me getting involved in something. I like being there.
Yeah. So you like the participation, the team aspect, the creativity of getting.
No I in team.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see how even just with those basic questions and talking to each one of you, you can see how those elements start to play through. So now let's take a look at some deeper dive into the do's and don'ts for each one of the elements. So from an earth perspective, things that you can do to create better connections with people who have a high earth preference is that directness. Think about the objectives. What is it that they're looking for? What do they need? Dan said, be brief, be bright, be gone. Focus on the fact aspect and be well organized, and watch for signs of impatience. You know, the darting of the eyes, or the drifting, or the tapping of the fingers. Those are all things that will indicate that, you know what, somebody's starting to, maybe you need to speed it along a little bit, and go at their pace. And then from a don't standpoint, you want to go in with, as I said, those strong facts. Don't hesitate, because they will notice, and they may address that immediately. Don't focus too much on feelings, because again, they are about facts. And if they are in charge, don't try to take over, because they want to be in charge from their perspective.
Yeah, a really good example of how we therefore utilize this, because I think this is important. How do we take it from this, and how do you use it? I was in a session yesterday with a client who's a general manager of a manufacturing plant, and he's super high earth. So I was speaking to somebody on my team about a solution we need to implement. And he said, well, and he's quite high fire, is Chris on my team. He said, well, let's go and let's brainstorm it with him and see what his ideas are and see what he wants to do. And I'm like, it's just not going to work with John. I'm like, we need to go with an 80% of an idea and a solution and let him give the other 20%, because he's so busy and so high earth. He didn't want to spend an hour just chewing the fat on this. And he loved it. We went in with here's the direction of travel, but we want you to have the ability to shape it still as well. I was like, I love this bit. I'd change that bit. I'd have so-and-so do that bit. Let's get it out there. Speak to my PA. So it's the ability. What we can now do is, because we know the clues, cues, and triggers, we know that John's high earth. We flex our style to meet that. Instead of saying, let's book 3 hours and let's just talk about this, or let's just brainstorm it. Let's just throw some ideas up on the wall. People are like, what? Are you kidding me? It's that little difference. Sorry, Susan, back to you.
No. So now let's take a look at air. From a do's perspective, I think, who was it? Kimberly said, you know, you got to come in with the detail. You got to be prepared, have that information to provide. They love things in writing, because then they have time to digest and read it. So they may process information a little bit differently. So they do want all that detail and the proof to go back to and refer to. They like to get knowledge from you so that they can make rational decisions. And they do like that slower pace and that additional formality aspect. The first one of the don't just kind of cracks me up. It says, don't get too close or hug me. Well, that's kind of like all of us right now, right? Nobody get too close or hug me. We're not hugging anybody right now. And but also don't be flippant on important issues, because things are very important to them. And then don't change the routine. They like structure. They like consistency. So they get very uncomfortable with change. And then also don't miss those details, the facts or figures. Make sure that you're providing them. So you can see when you're going into, if you're going into a meeting with someone who has a high air preference, what you take with you. You need to make sure that you're taking all the facts, all the background, all the information, have it be concise and direct. So that because those are all things that someone with an AIR perspective really values.
Yeah, and I'd just reinforce at this point as well, we're going to touch on flexing very briefly, but even if air is one of your lowest, it doesn't mean you can't go there. And that's what we're trying to reinforce with TetraMap. Instead of boxing people in, we're unboxing you and empowering you to go where you need to go. So whilst you might just view the world predominantly through two preferences, they might be your highest because it's just natural to you, right? It's just natural to you to be earth and fire. It doesn't mean you can't go there. You might not want to spend a lot of time in air doing planning, but we're not saying you're not capable of, but just be aware of, you might have a tendency to not spend too much time there when you need to spend a bit more time there. So like I have quite low air, but before I do a workshop, my air massively dials up because I want to make sure I've got all the right equipment, all the right assessment tools, everything's in good working order. Then I can just be in my own natural preference when I'm facilitating. I don't need to worry about have I got everything right.
Now, what does water, the highest water perspective look like? These are people who love it when you're patient. They love someone who's supportive. They like to slow down. They like to discuss things. They like to be able to give their opinions, but they like to have time to actually consider how they feel about something. So they may not be the best at making snap decisions. They like it when you're showing personal interest in them and in what they're doing. And they like it when you ask for commitment from a friendly perspective. So not overbearing and we need a decision by today. So you have to be a little bit warmer with them and a little bit gentler with them from a do perspective. From a don't perspective, these people may have a good nature, a very good nature, and they can be taken advantage of because they do have a good nature. And they may not like to make decisions, snap decisions, as I said, or they may not really interact great with last minute surprises and don't like to be pushed a lot. So more considerate, more introspective, and more relationship driven. Dan, anything to add on that one?
Nope, good.
No? Okay. So from a fire perspective, what you do to be more engaging with someone who has a high fire preference is to be friendly, be sociable. If you have a group of people who have high fire in a room together, you probably won't get a word in if you're not high fire because they're all talking and trying to compete with each other. They like entertainment, they like stimulation, they like things to be busy and interactive and engaging. They like it when you're open and flexible, and they love stories. So they're big storytellers. And they also like to express how they feel, and they like to express themselves with words or visual pictures. And they like it when other people are interested in them. So they like to be the center of attention, put it that way. From a don't standpoint, if you are interacting with someone who has that high air or high fire preference, and you take 10 spreadsheets to go through, they're probably going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what's happening now. I can't digest all that information. So they don't really like the details. Just give me the big picture, tell me what you need, and we'll move on from there. They also love that variety. So they don't love routine. If they have to do the same thing every single day, that's probably going to make them crazy. And they love to work with people. So some people who have a high fire preference right now, and if they're working at home alone, may be struggling. So they like it when you engage them, and when you even if it's virtually, to talk with them and get their thoughts and opinions. Dan, any ideas? Any additional?
Nope, all good.
How are we doing on time? Okay. So Dan talked a little bit about flexing and what that means from, oops, went too fast, what flexing means. So in order to flex and kind of shrink the gap between your element and someone else's, if you're not in the same element area, then you have to know your own preference. You have to know what you prefer, and then you have to understand the preferences of other people. So you have to be able to recognize what you need to do to lessen that gap. And you have to, flex your style. And it's more than just what you say. It's the language that you use. It is the energy that you exhibit. It is the gestures. It's the pace. It's the body language. It's all those physical attributes. I mean, we talked a little bit about, if you go into someone who has a high air preference and you have a high fire preference, and you're all like hair on fire, they may be like, whoa, hang on, just take it down a notch. So because they don't respond well to that, because that's not the language that they speak. So flexing is about, okay, so I have a high fire preference. I know that the person I'm speaking to is a high water. So I need to go in a calmer way. I need to go in with, asking them how they're feeling about a certain aspect. So I need to change my behaviors to match what they need to be a better communicator with them, with those different aspects.
Yeah, totally agree. And it comes across all different facets of communication. So I talked earlier about John, one of our clients, who's very high earth. So my emails to him are very short and very concise. And actually, sometimes it's just easier to send him a quick text. I found he's so high earth. It's like, don't send me emails. I haven't got time to look at them. Send me a quick text. If it's important, text me. If it's not important, why are you communicating with me anyway? That's his approach, right? Now, I'm just good with that because I'm high earth as well. Other people in his team who he leads are quite offended by his approach and think he doesn't care at the minute. So I'm having to do some executive coaching with him to help him flex his style into these different spaces as well. Whereas somebody high air, I'll probably send them a written email and bullet point it and list out what I'm trying to communicate.
Yep. And if you think about from a diversity aspect and how important it is to think about the diversity and the makeup of your team overall, if you have a team of people who all have the same highest preference, you may all be speaking the same language, but you may not have the different views and the diversity of thought to get a robust, to have a robust team. So it's great to be able to take a look at what everyone brings to the table. It's important to consider differences of opinion and different perspectives overall. So it's crucial within Tetramap, I think, to be able to identify other people's strengths and other people's preferences, which strengths and preferences are different. Dan talked about that a little bit. He can dial up his air and really organize something and structure something where that's not his natural preference to do that. But he can do that, and he has a very strong ability and a strength in that, but it's not his preference. It's not what he would prefer to do. So if you take a look at using Tetramap as a framework for communication, earth is firm, air is clear, water is calm, and fire is bright. And you have to consider how you communicate with other people. So if you are going to have a meeting, think about who you're meeting with, how you approach them. What do they need? How do you balance communications for every person on your team if you're sending an email or if you're having a conference call or a webinar? How do you balance that communication, and how are you considerate of other people's feelings and to create solutions that work for everyone and not just only one area?
That's good. So while Susan wraps up over the next couple of minutes, unfortunately, I am going to drop off now. So John, who funnily enough has been a theme throughout this call, who is quite demanding as a client, put in another last minute call with me that starts right now at 12:30. And I don't want to be late for him, but I also wanted to be a part of this sessions today. We've only scratched the surface on this. And I'd love to connect with people afterwards. Like I said, I'm in the area. I'm always happy to just grab a coffee. with no other intent than just sharing ideas and best practice and just talking about local challenges and opportunities. So Susan, I'll let you wrap up. So sorry I've got to dash off now, but it's been a real pleasure, and thank you for taking your time out to join us today as well.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
See you soon.
So if you take a look at the actual model here and this framework of, and we've kind of color coded things. The model itself is from a left side, it's earth, then air, then water, then fire, and earth is brown, and then air is green, water is blue, and fire is red. So we've added colors, there are shapes, there are hand motions to it. Actually, when we go through the 3.5 hour course or the 7 hour course, there's actually audio that goes with it as well. But if you are interested in the structure of the model, if you take a look at earth and fire, those are the two external elements, and those are on the outside of the model. If you take a look at the detail and the connection of air and water, those are the internal aspects, and those are the internal elements. If you take a look at the left two elements of purpose and detail, those are left brain. If you take a look at fire and water and connection and energy, those are right brain. So there was a very intentional design of the model overall. So it wasn't just put together and with the elements in mind. It was very put together with very detailed structure in mind as well, and how it was created. So just to kind of review some key elements, you're not just one element, we're a combination of all four. So when you take the full instrument, you will never have a 0 or anything under a 10 in any of the elements. So because we are all four elements, and we need to take responsibility for our own behavior and be able to recognize the behaviors of others to be more effective from a communication standpoint. And remember, this is that roadmap that will help you get from point A to point communicate. That Tetramap does provide that framework for looking at things through 4 different perspectives. And you can use that as kind of that wine press of, if you're going to make a presentation, how do you make sure that you're going to reach every person that is on the call? Well, you need to involve those 4 different elements, so you're speaking the language of the people that you're presenting to. We said strengths can be different than preferences, and in order to be great at flexing, it's not something that just happens overnight. You got to continue to practice. You have to ask people. You've got to be open and honest and say, hey, what's the best way that I can communicate with you? What do you like? What do you not like? We need to be honest and open with each other to create that better communication overall. And as Dan said, we've just barely scratched the surface of what Tetramap is, but hopefully you have a good sense of what each one of the 4 elements means and how you can use that information overall. Something that we always like to do at the end of our sessions is say, okay, now what are you going to take away from this? What are you going to do now? How are you going to take action? And we position that through each one of the 4 elements. So from an earth perspective, what are you going to do differently after today? What's the practice that you're going to work on implementing? So it's all about structure, decision, detail, the implementation and the action overall. From an air perspective, what are you clearer about? What are you more aware of? From a water perspective, how are you feeling about going back with this, and how are you going to connect with the other people on your team? And then from a fire perspective, how will this help you in the future? What do you see? How do you see using this? So you can kind of see how taking action can be structured as well with all four of the elements. So with that being said, what questions do you have about Tetramap? Anybody? Anything in the chat box? Nothing?
I don't see anything in the chat box. How about you, Kara? I know Dan addressed the question earlier on about the similarity between DISC and this. So
Correct.
We have that.
I just reviewed it. There are no questions at this time.
So what I think that tells us, Susan, and I really appreciate that, the last couple of slides, because I'm sitting here thinking, how do I, at the end of an event, kind of summarize? But you did it extremely well. And what I got out of it is, we all, so it doesn't matter if you're preparing for a meeting that is maybe not, so you're not working with your team members or those you work with, but perhaps you're working with volunteers or in, other aspects. So you can use this by planning ahead, knowing that there are, 4 different types with the high air and the water and the fire and the earth. And that you have to kind of work with all of those if you really want to communicate to everyone. Otherwise, you're only communicating maybe to the one person that has all high earth, which that was mine. Mine was earth and air. But I'm realizing, even just yesterday, we were having a team meeting and I said something that kind of shocked my team. I'm like, don't worry so much about the budget. And they're like looking at me like, what? Did she just say that? And because you know what, we're in such an uncertain time and it's not about money right now. I mean, we know we're not making budget on anything, here at the chamber, because it's just the nature of what's happening in our world. So I showed a little bit of my water, I think, and they were kind of surprised to see that. So I think if we all understand that we all have these, that we have them at varying degrees and in varying situations, it makes you a better listener, a better communicator. So I think in the 45 minutes or whatever, you really, you nailed it in terms of how we all need to understand there's different aspects to ourselves. We can all be there at different times, but we need to know. And the big thing is you shouldn't just hire people that just like you. And you shouldn't just work with people that are just like you, because then you don't really advance in any way. So I think this was valuable. But the one big thing that I took away, and I had never thought about this, in a dishwasher, I just throw in my knives and my forks and my spoons, whatever way they land in any of the sections. But now I think I'm going to try to organize, and being that earth and air part, I like that idea. My husband's going to look at me like I've lost my mind.
And that's a very good point, because what we hear a lot when we've completed the sessions is, can I do this with my spouse? Because it does really highlight the differences that you have with somebody in relationships, not only at work, but also at home. So I've actually Tetramapped all of my friends and it's been very enlightening to see, and for them to understand why I act the way I do and why I engage them in the way that I do, and the same from my perspective.
Well, I always say to myself, I tell people, I talk to myself more than anybody would know. And what I mean by that is that after I do something or I say something, I'm talking to myself saying, was that the right thing to say? Did you handle it right? Because you really want, like Dan said, I mean, I kind of felt like Dan and I were in sync in the beginning. You're to the detail. You want to know what you got to get done. Don't give me this other stuff, because I got another list of things I got to do. Doesn't mean I'm not empathetic. Doesn't mean I don't care. But I check off lists and I have my goals and I have things that I have to do. So it is important that you kind of understand the way everybody's coming from, and that you don't judge somebody on somebody different and judge somebody on something that you wouldn't judge yourself the same way. So I think this was hugely valuable. This is recorded, and I know not all of my staff was able to join me in watching this, but I think this is an exercise. And when I took the video off, it's because I was taking a picture of the screen that showed all the do's and the don'ts of all of them. But I'm like, see, you got the video. Don't worry about that. So those of you that have the opportunity to call Susan or Dan or meet Dan for some coffee, do it. Very genuine people. They'll just chat with you for a little bit. If you want more information, it's up on the slide, and perhaps your company might, engage them to work with all of you to make sure that your team is more successful because you understand where each other is coming from. Otherwise, go back and watch the recording. And I think just hearing the things again and kind of really understanding the do's and the don'ts, that helps you, even in just one-on-one meetings that you have within your office, and the person will think like, wow, what a genius this person is. They really get me, because you've been given a really good resource today. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure sharing this information with you. Please, as Stina said, reach out. We're all in this together. We're all human beings. So if there's anything that we can do to help support you, please reach out. Let us know. We'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. Thank you. This was really very worthwhile. I appreciate the time you both spent with us, and hopefully we will see you out and about and in person. So the Chamber does have a few in-person events, believe it or not. We will do them following the CDC guidelines. So we have our Golf Classic, which is next week. We're looking forward to that. Then we have our Lunch and Learn. That one is generating referrals during social distancing. And then we have It's a Wrap. That's going to be our combination awards, installation of the chairwoman, and just so many things that It's a Wrap 2020. So hopefully you will join us for all of the upcoming in-person events. I think, unless something major happens in between, this might have been the last virtual for the year. Certainly there will be many more last year, because we realize how productive they are and how easy they are, and no traffic to get here. It's great. So thanks again to all of you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Carrie, for orchestrating all of this in the back. Appreciate you. That was my water side. Did you see that? That was my water side. Came out for 2 seconds. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.